So I finally got around to playing Undertale. Yeah, that's right. I'm taking on one of the big ones. This is the surreal, retro-inspired RPG developed and published by Toby Fox. This is a title that many would include in a video game hall of fame and is one of a few titles out there that is considered by many as being one of the greatest video games of all time. And I've never played it. I've always wanted to because the conversation around it has always been interesting, and the things that people say about this game are typically the things that excite me and tantalize me into wanting to play a title like this. But for whatever reason, it has just fallen through the cracks over the years. That's why I'm returning to this game 10 years after the date to see how it holds up in 2025. That's what we do here on The Patient Gamer. If you didn't know, if you're new here, we review games that are at least 1 year old to see what they are like in the current state and whether they are worth going back to and getting off your back catalogue. That's right, we're going to battle that one title at a time here. If you've got titles on your backlog that you'd like me to explore, let me know in the comments, hit us up, and that could be the next game we review here. And please, don't hesitate to give us a like and subscribe if you do want to see more content like this. We are going to do a bit of a giveaway as well once we reach 100 subscribers. I will pick one lucky subscriber out of a hat who will receive a physical copy of Blasphemous 2, my favorite game that I went back and played in 2024. But right now, it's time to ask the question, how does it play today? Undertale sees you trawling through the weirdly wonderful world of the underground, with you randomly encountering monsters out in the wild in a way that feels like Earthbound meets Pokemon. Combat loosely follows that of a turn-based game. Each battle, you'll have a few commands that you can use against your enemy. You can attack, which initiates a simple timing-based mechanism that will determine the strength of your attack, and different weapons will initiate that minigame in ways that manage to switch things up just ever so slightly. Your opponent will then, of course, take their turn to attack you, and that initiates yet another little mini-game. And this is where one of Undertale's best and central gimmicks comes into play. Each enemy will try and attack you, which will be represented as this little love heart on the screen, and you've got this little box which you will have to move around in to avoid these attacks. It sounds simple, but trust me, it evolves quite a lot and becomes pretty insane. This is actually really fun and tense, and is surely the feature with the most mechanical depth in the game. The way enemies' attacks manifest in these minigames has a ton of variation. Think WarioWare, meaning every encounter is a little bit different every single time. It's a system that honestly just had way more legs than I expected it would, and the game really squeezes as much juice as possible out of this novel conceit. The other actions in battle include using an item, which don't really offer the same variation outside of basic healing items and the occasional stat booster. You can also run from battles or spare a monster depending on whether they actually want to fight, or if you've subdued them enough through either whittling down their health or talking them down. And that brings us to the last action you can take in battle, which is the Act command, an action which allows you to engage in conversation with the enemies. Yeah, this is where things get a little bit weird and a little bit wacky, and in a good way. It's obviously one of the most unique novelties of the game and the combat system as a whole, because you'll usually have a range of different ways that you can engage in conversation with the enemy, like flirting, complimenting, flexing, frisking, and even whispering sweet nothings in their ear. And these will usually prompt a variety of different responses and replies, some of which will tell you more about the enemy and can result in some wildly unpredictable outcomes. Safe to say, it's usually far more interesting to see what conversation with the enemy will do rather than just engaging straight in combat. Sometimes you're going to alter the type of attack that the enemy makes on you, which results in a different type of minigame playing out. Sometimes sparing an enemy will have a different outcome on the real world of the game, and the outcome won't always be immediately apparent. You can even resolve a battle by getting two enemies to confess their love for each other. Yeah, that's how strange combat can be at times. You can, of course, win a battle without ever attacking the enemy, and it looks like you can do a complete pacifist run of the game, which is always impressive. It's so fun winning battles in just some of the most unconventional ways, although I will say that the game is pretty easy. I did finally run into some difficulty in the late game, but even then you kind of just combat that by buying more healing items to brute force your way through boss encounters. The real test is ultimately having to best those minigames, which is a really fun challenge. Like most turn-based games, obviously Undertale is an RPG, but I use that quite lightly. The role-playing elements are admittedly very light, and I think that's because that's clearly not the focus here. Undertale is far more interested in saying something about the genre rather than being a shining example of it. At least in regards to its systems. Puzzles are good, if not super memorable, which did surprise me. I was expecting, given the nature of the game and the way it so often trolls the player, that I was going to come up against some really out there answers and even some sort of overly convoluted bullshit to navigate, or at least puzzles that pretend to have that before, revealing some deceptively simple solution as it pointed and laughed at me for the 47th time. But Undertale plays most of the puzzles pretty straight. I feel this was a bit of a missed opportunity overall to really mess with my head in the same way the rest of the game does, which kind of brings me to one of my favorite things about this game, which is that Undertale is all about subverting your expectations. It's very much a video game for lovers of video games, especially gamers who have been around the block a little while, like me. It abuses the fact that at this point, if you have been gaming since the late 80s or the early 90s, you do have certain expectations from video games that are just built into your wiring. And the longer you've been playing video games and the more ingrained those expectations are, the more I suspect you're going to really appreciate how they flip the script on some of these common tropes and industry staples. The game often knows exactly what you're going to do and has so much fun with that knowledge and in weaponizing it against you. I was asked if I wanted to ride a ferry for 3 gold, and instead of paying for the privilege, I was given 3 gold at the end of the trip. I mean, that's literally what the guy said. Or another time I was given an explanation of a really convoluted puzzle, and of course I was sitting there thinking, shit, this is a lot to remember. Should I be writing some of this down? And just as I went to go grab a pen and paper, of course, I'm not going to need to remember any of it at all because the puzzle just doesn't even work. Undertale is brimming with little bits of fuckery like this, and almost all of them were enjoyable. What I love about Undertale is how it just constantly felt like a different game from the one it was 5 minutes ago. First it's a Pokemon game, now it's a side-scroller, now I'm playing a rhythm game, now it's a game show, now it's Space Invaders, now I'm fighting a vegetable, now I'm green. It's always changing and evolving and reinventing itself. I love the way the consequences and results of your actions can never really be truly anticipated, and you never really know what they're going to be until well after the fact. And yeah, look, I'll say that I really wasn't expecting such deep layers of choice and consequence in a humble little indie like this. The game is always trying to pull the rug out from under you, and it mostly succeeded in doing that to me, but your mileage, of course, may vary. There are some moments in the game that are just completely random and totally out of pocket, and you don't really know what to make of some of these. You'll just be playing and something will happen and you'll be like, okay, that happened. Don't really know why, what that means, but okay. Other times it goes left of field in a way that really displays the game's keen intellect. For better or worse, it all contributes towards the creation of this truly bizarre and perplexing world. The finale especially is the biggest and most ambitious bait and switch of all. What you suspect has been lurking beneath the surface this whole time finally reveals itself, and it's worth the wait. I don't want to give anything away, but wow, it's something. I mean, some of those images, I'm never going to be able to unsee. You're just going to have to witness it for yourself. Trust me. The prologue, though, was oddly unsatisfying, and the ending overall wasn't entirely conclusive. Undertale is a game that has a ton of character, irresistible charm, and an infectious, tangible personality. I feel like I kind of know the person Undertale would be if it was a person. It'd be this very friendly, cheeky guy who laughs at his own jokes just a little too loudly, but he's also kind of the life of the party. Although every now and then, you catch him standing off in a corner, just staring into space, and you think, wait a minute, there's a little bit more to this guy. He's dark, he's brooding, he's a little bit mysterious. But he's also the smartest person in the room, and he will often make that brutally clear. Undertale is incredibly self-aware, super meta, and often breaking the fourth wall, directly referencing and providing biting commentary on the limitations and boundaries of the video game medium, and the expectations we have of them after years of tired cliches and formulaic approaches. The unexpected and unusual is found at every turn and in every corner, and Undertale loves to misdirect the player like this, and that is where a lot of the game's distinct brand of humor comes from. Like when you finally find a protective piece of armor, but it's a dusty tutu. Or when you engage in a snail race and by encouraging your snail, you actually inadvertently give it a panic attack. I don't want to give away the funniest jokes in the game, as they really are one of the biggest selling points. Not to mention me explaining them just makes them patently less funny, but some of the gags deliver genuine belly laughs, usually at your own expense and failure. It's a game that laughs at you, not with you. It's a very silly game. That's one thing I want to say. It's it's silly. And I don't know, some people are going to like that level of silliness. For others, it might wear a little thin. Sometimes it pushes its luck, like a little kid asking for another 5 minutes of TV before bedtime. And at times, I can't believe I'm saying this, it was just a little too childish for my tastes. Man, that's sad to hear me say that. I really am a miserable old prick. It's a little too of its time every now and then as well. There's a bit of old school internet speak that permeates certain parts of the dialogue that made it feel specifically dated. But look, when the jokes do land, this game is very comical and genuinely funny. It truly made me laugh out loud at several points throughout my playtime, and it is not often that a game is able to make me laugh at all, or even bothers to try. So the fact that this game is able to do that with relative frequency is refreshing and should be lauded. The art design is really cozy, like a warm cup of cocoa, full of high contrast colors and a humble amount of detail for a world that's obviously meant to be quite minimalistic in its presentation. It's got a couple of nice little parallax effects that add a bit of visual dimension to a world that's mostly flat. The game, of course, is also just generally trying to conjure up the look and feel and vibe of classic titles from that era, and as such is presented in the aspect ratio of a CRT TV. The characters are all quite colourful and original though, resembling the inhabitants of what could only be described as a drug-induced fever dream. But I will say the distinct lack of a coherent approach to its presentation just felt a little too all over the place for me at times. The world ranges from creatures big and small, some simple anthropomorphic animals, others literal heads of nothing but gnashing teeth. This just comes down to personal preference for me. Some will love this scattershot approach, but I personally like a little more consistency. The writing is pretty strong when it is doing its thing. Whether that is your thing or not, again, is going to come down to your own preferences. And it can be surprisingly poignant at times. The way it contrasts with the overall silliness of the rest of the game is pretty jarring and effective, but these unexpected touches of humanity were too few and far between. For the most part, the game puts its irreverent, sarcastic tone first and foremost, and it rides that baby all the way home. And for me, personally, it just overstayed its welcome ever so slightly. There's great sound design here, again, that's really reminiscent of this era, with high-pitched blips and chirps everywhere, and even without voice work, there's still emotion and tone conveyed through really clever sound design of the dialogue. Think in the same way that Banjo-Kazooie did this back on the Nintendo 64. The soundtrack also emulates the 16-bit sound of the SNES, taking inspiration from titles like Final Fantasy, with an offering of erratic chip tunes and delectable bit pop. It's an intentionally archaic and accurate representation of the sound of this time, but it will often also intersperse live instruments or real instrument synthesis as well, from jaunty piano to a jazzy sax riff, from cymbals to xylophones and even more offbeat instruments like the guiro and cowbell. It's an eclectic range and another way in which Undertale just refuses to fit into any one mold. There are also moments where the music just cuts out completely, which is disconcerting in a game of this kind, where music is always there, it's just always present to an almost overbearing degree. Undertale is a game that is happy to sit in some silence every now and then, offering the player time for a bit of thoughtful introspection. The music and the score is quite varied. A lot of the tracks are really pronounced and evocative. Some are quirky, some are spooky, some are whimsical. It's melancholic, jovial, and even a little sinister. The game does reuse a number of tracks, though, which means their significance is diminished upon repeated listens, especially when they are played away from the original area or location that initially gave them such presence. Undertale is a game I really do feel like you had to be there for. It was clearly a big watershed moment in video games, and it's easy to see why. At the time, Undertale would have been pretty groundbreaking and pushed some of the boundaries around what we expect from video games and our relationships with them. It flipped some of the expected tropes of the medium on their heads in interesting ways, but in the last 10 years, I feel like we've had a ton of games like this come out. Inscription, One Shot, Getting Over It, just to name a few. All of which, of course, owe some element of their conception to the innovation of Undertale. So that's definitely not lost on me. But in today's landscape, I think Undertale finds itself surrounded by so many similar titles that do the same kind of thing, some that maybe even do it better, that it almost seems a little tame and safe by comparison. Undertale is a good game. I'm glad I experienced, not least of all for trying to do things a little differently, for at least trying to bring something new to a medium that already feels so tired and old. and it's one you should definitely experience as well, if for nothing else but its trailblazing, rebellious approach, its intentions to break away from the well-trodden paths of modern game design, and of course, its ability to make you laugh, that most valuable of commodity in this weary world. But as much as I did enjoy it, I was kind of left wanting and expecting just a little bit more, something else. I'm not sure what, but I kept waiting for that thing that really tied it all together and elevated it from not just being a good game or a great game, but one of the greatest games of all time. But if this one's sitting on your backlog, I definitely recommend giving it a go. Don't put it to the top of the list. I wouldn't prioritize it too heavily, but if you've got nothing else to play, give it a whirl. It's pretty short as well, and there's a high chance that you'll have a lot of fun with this. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, you are one of the very special people in this world. Here on The Patient Gamer, we battle your back catalogue one title at a time. If you've got one you'd like me to go back and play to give you my verdict, then let me know in the comments. Otherwise, Happy New Year, and thanks for watching.